64 Marine Corps helicopters insert 4,800 troops onto 3 contested islands in a 6-hour amphibious assault. The operation becomes the largest helicopter-borne island assault since Vietnam. September 3, 2025, South China Sea, Spratly Islands. At 4:17 a.m., aboard USS America and USS Tripoli, 2 amphibious assault ships operating 80 nautical miles east of the disputed Spratly Islands, 4,800 Marines prepared for the most ambitious helicopter assault in decades. Their mission? Seize 3 islands, Thitu Island, Northeast Cay, and Southwest Cay, currently occupied by Chinese forces. Intelligence indicated approximately 890 People's Liberation Army Marines defended the 3 islands, equipped with anti-aircraft missiles, heavy machine guns, and fortified positions. The American assault would employ overwhelming force delivered by 64 helicopters operating in coordinated waves. The strategic context was clear. China had militarized the Spratly Islands over the preceding decade, building artificial islands, installing military infrastructure, and declaring sovereignty over waters internationally recognized as disputed. When Chinese forces occupied the 3 islands held by Philippine forces, killing 12 Filipino soldiers in the process, the Philippines invoked its mutual defense treaty with the United States. After diplomatic efforts failed, military action was authorized. The objective was to retake the islands, expel Chinese forces, and restore them to Philippine control. The helicopter fleet consisted of 40 MV-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft, 16 CH-53E Super Stallion heavy-lift helicopters, and 8 AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters. The Ospreys, capable of carrying 24 combat-equipped Marines at 280 knots, would deliver the initial assault waves and subsequent reinforcements. The Super Stallions would transport heavy equipment, including artillery pieces, ammunition, and supplies, and the Vipers would provide close air support, suppressing enemy positions with rockets, missiles, and 20mm cannon fire. At 5 a.m., the operation began with preparatory strikes. 8 F-35B Lightning II aircraft, operating from USS America's flight deck, struck Chinese air defense positions on all 3 islands with precision-guided bombs. The strikes destroyed 4 HQ-17 short-range air defense systems and damaged radar installations, degrading Chinese ability to engage the incoming helicopter assault. At 5:15 a.m., the first wave of helicopters launched. 24 MV-22 Ospreys, each carrying 24 Marines, lifted off from the 2 amphibious ships and formed into 3 8-aircraft formations, one designated for each island. At 5:47 a.m., the first wave reached the islands. Thitu Island, the largest target measuring 1,400 meters by 400 meters, was defended by approximately 340 Chinese Marines occupying fortified positions along the beaches and interior. As the 8 Ospreys approached at 200 feet altitude, Chinese defenders opened fire with Type 89 heavy machine guns and shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. One Osprey, hit by a missile in its starboard engine, executed an emergency landing on the beach. All 24 Marines survived the hard landing and immediately engaged defending forces. The remaining 7 Ospreys landed at designated zones 400 meters inland, deploying 168 Marines who began advancing toward Chinese positions. At 5:49 a.m., the assault on Northeast Cay began. This smaller island, measuring 600 meters by 200 meters, was defended by 280 Chinese Marines concentrated around the island's single pier and helicopter pad. 8 Ospreys landed simultaneously, deploying 192 Marines who immediately came under heavy fire. The fighting was intense and close range. Chinese defenders, well entrenched in concrete bunkers, fired automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. 2 Marines were killed in the first 30 seconds. 8 more were wounded, but the American force, larger and better equipped, began systematically clearing Chinese positions using fire and maneuver tactics. Should helicopter assaults prioritize speed over force protection, or should suppression come before insertion? Type A for rapid assault accepting initial casualties. Type B for extensive suppression before landing. Comment your tactical reasoning. At 5:51 a.m., Southwest Cay came under assault. 8 Ospreys landed 270 Chinese Marines defending this 200-meter by 100-meter rocky outcrop, fortified with bunkers and trenches. The landing zones were under direct fire from Chinese positions. One Osprey was hit by RPG fire while hovering, its tail damaged but still flyable. The pilot executed an emergency landing, and all Marines aboard disembarked under fire. Within 5 minutes, 192 Marines were engaged in firefights across the tiny island. At 6 a.m., the second wave launched from the amphibious ships. 16 more Ospreys carrying 384 additional Marines headed toward the 3 islands to reinforce the initial assault forces. At 6:30 a.m., these reinforcements landed, bringing total American forces to 960 Marines distributed across 3 islands fighting 890 Chinese defenders. The numerical advantage was now with the Americans, but the Chinese held fortified positions and showed no signs of surrendering. At 6:45 a.m., 8 AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters arrived over the islands, having launched from USS America. The Vipers, armed with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles and 70mm rocket pods, began engaging Chinese bunkers and fighting positions. On Thitu Island, 2 Vipers fired 8 Hellfire missiles at a fortified command bunker, collapsing the structure and killing an estimated 20 defenders. The Viper's 20mm cannons strafed trench lines, forcing Chinese Marines to take cover and allowing American ground forces to advance. Subscribe to Navy Mission Now for the most comprehensive amphibious warfare coverage. This is analysis that reveals modern marine operations. By 7:30 a.m., the third helicopter wave arrived. 8 CH-53E Super Stallions carrying M7V7 155mm howitzers and ammunition landed on Thitu Island. The artillery pieces, assembled within 20 minutes, began firing on Chinese positions across all 3 islands. The 155mm shells, directed by forward observers with the Marine infantry, destroyed bunkers, collapsed trenches, and demoralized defenders. The addition of artillery firepower shifted the tactical balance decisively toward the Americans. At 8 a.m., Chinese resistance on Northeast Cay collapsed. Surrounded and outgunned, the surviving 140 defenders surrendered to American forces. Casualties had been severe. 140 Chinese Marines were killed, and 140 more surrendered, many wounded. American casualties on Northeast Cay were 18 killed and 47 wounded. The island was secured, and Marines began establishing defensive positions against potential counterattacks. At 9:15 a.m., Southwest Cay was declared secure. The defenders, reduced to fewer than 100 effective combatants after hours of fighting, raised a white flag. The final count showed 110 Chinese Marines killed and 60 surrendered. American casualties were 12 killed and 38 wounded. The tiny island had been the site of the most intense fighting of the operation, with combat occurring at ranges often measured in meters. Thitu Island, the largest and most heavily defended, remained contested. At 10 a.m., the fourth helicopter wave brought an additional 384 Marines, bringing total forces on Thitu to over 1,400. The Chinese defenders, now outnumbered 4-1 and facing artillery, attack helicopters, and overwhelming infantry force, were compressed into a 200-meter defensive perimeter around the island's main structures. At 10:30 a.m., American commanders offered surrender terms via loudspeaker. The response was continued resistance. At 10:45 a.m., the final assault on Thitu began. Marines advanced behind artillery barrages and attack helicopter strikes. The fighting was methodical and deadly. Bunkers were cleared with grenades and rifle fire. Trenches were assaulted by fire teams using suppression and maneuver. And gradually, the Chinese perimeter contracted. At 11:15 a.m., the Chinese commander, recognizing his position was hopeless, surrendered the remaining 90 defenders. Chinese casualties on Thitu totaled 190 killed and 90 captured. American losses were 43 killed and 124 wounded. By 11:30 a.m., all 3 islands were secured. The 6-hour operation had succeeded in retaking territory from a determined defender, but the cost had been significant. Total casualties: American forces suffered 73 killed and 209 wounded. Chinese forces suffered 340 killed and 290 captured. Approximately 60 Chinese Marines had escaped by boat to nearby Chinese-held islands before the encirclement was complete. The final helicopter count showed the operational toll. 64 helicopters had flown 147 sorties over 6 hours. 2 Ospreys were damaged beyond field repair and required transport back to U.S. facilities. 1 Super Stallion suffered engine damage from small arms fire and was temporarily grounded. All other aircraft remained operational but required extensive maintenance. The intensity of operations had pushed helicopters, pilots, and maintenance crews to their limits. Do you think amphibious assaults remain viable in modern warfare with precision anti-ship weapons, or are they becoming obsolete? Share your assessment below. For the 4,800 Marines who conducted the assault, September 3rd became the most significant combat operation in Marine Corps history since Fallujah. They had executed complex helicopter insertions under fire, fought determined enemies in fortified positions, and secured objectives despite casualties. The operation validated decades of training and preparation for amphibious warfare. The Marines received presidential recognition for their performance. Individual acts of valor were recognized with medals ranging from Bronze Stars to Navy Crosses. For China, September 3rd was a humiliating tactical defeat that carried strategic implications. The loss of 3 islands and over 630 casualties demonstrated that Chinese forces, while capable of seizing territory, couldn't hold it against American military power. Chinese state media initially claimed the Marines had withdrawn voluntarily after completing their mission, but satellite imagery showing American flags over all 3 islands made the lie transparent. Within a week, Chinese propaganda shifted to threatening retaliation while avoiding acknowledgement of the defeat. For the Philippines, the operation was vindication of its alliance with the United States. Filipino forces, unable to retake the islands independently, had relied on American military power. The 3 islands were returned to Philippine control, with Filipino Marines rotating in to replace American forces over following weeks. The operation strengthened public support in the Philippines for the U.S. alliance and complicated Chinese efforts to intimidate other Southeast Asian nations. The 64 helicopters that had executed the operation required weeks of maintenance to return to full readiness. Ospreys needed rotor blade replacements and transmission overhauls from the stress of repeated maximum weight takeoffs and landings. Super Stallions required engine inspections and airframe repairs. And Vipers needed weapons systems, recalibration, and structural assessments. The operational tempo, while successful, had aged the aircraft months in a single day. The families of the 73 Americans killed received notifications within hours of the operation's conclusion. Memorial services were held aboard USS America and USS Tripoli, with flag-draped coffins honored by their comrades. The Marines who died, ranging in age from 19 to 38, had volunteered for service knowing combat was possible. Their sacrifice had secured islands that, while small, represented important strategic positions in the contested South China Sea. For the 290 captured Chinese Marines, their fate was complicated by diplomatic and legal considerations. As prisoners of war taken in combat, they were entitled to Geneva Convention protections, but China refused to acknowledge they had been captured, claiming they were kidnapped by American aggressors. The impasse lasted 3 weeks before a face-saving solution was negotiated. The prisoners were transferred to neutral third-party custody and eventually repatriated through diplomatic channels without either side acknowledging the other's narrative. As the sun set on September 3rd, American and Philippine flags flew over 3 islands that had been Chinese-controlled at dawn. The cost had been 73 American and 12 Filipino lives, with over 200 wounded. But the strategic message was unmistakable. Territorial seizures in the South China Sea would be reversed by force if necessary. The operation reshaped regional calculations about Chinese territorial ambitions and American resolve to counter them. Now I want 3 perspectives from you. First, do helicopter-based amphibious assaults remain viable given advances in anti-aircraft weapons? Second, what does this operation reveal about the continuing relevance of Marine Corps expeditionary capabilities? Third, should such assaults risk hundreds of casualties to retake small islands of limited intrinsic value? Comment your detailed strategic analysis below. Your insights drive the conversations we have on Navy Mission. And if this breakdown of the largest helicopter assault in decades gave you new understanding of modern amphibious warfare, prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to Navy Mission, and turning on notifications. Until next time, stay mobile, stay lethal, and remember that Marines go where ships can't and planes won't.